When I first saw the gates of Ridgeview, they reminded me of something out of a Gothic novel. Wrought iron twisted into sharp, curling thorns, standing like sentries against the forest behind them. The air smelled like pine and old stone. Claire said it smelled like endings. I told her it smelled like a fresh start. I should have known she was right. Ridgeview Psychiatric Institute was a name that carried weight in academic circles. Isolated deep in the woods of New Hampshire, it was the kind of place that whispered prestige and secrets in equal measure. A fortress for the broken and brilliant, a hospital for the minds that had wandered too far and never quite returned. Took the position as lead clinical psychiatrist after months of negotiation. It was supposed to be a step forward. For my career, for our family. Claire wasn't convinced. She hated the idea of leaving the city. She said the silence of the woods would eat her alive. Our son Charlie, on the other hand, was just happy to be near trees and chipmunks and anything that resembled adventure. The main building looked like a crumbling cathedral. Gray stone, narrow windows, ivy curling up the corners like nature was trying to reclaim what humanity had tried to hide. Inside, Ridgeview was strangely beautiful. Wide hallways with dark wood floors that creaked like they were remembering things. Oil paintings of forgotten doctors. Antique clocks that never struck the same hour. It didn't feel like a hospital. It felt like a stage, and everyone inside it, staff, patients, even the air itself was performing. Claire wandered through it like a ghost during our first week. She didn't complain, she just faded. Her studio at home remained unopened, her sketchbooks untouched. The woman who once painted for 12 hours straight now spent afternoons staring at the fire, her hands twitching like they were missing something. Then she met him. His name was Nathaniel Cross. I first saw him in the Ridgeview Art Wing, a vaulted room with stained glass windows and a faint smell of turpentine and earth. He was standing in front of a sculpture in progress. A woman, hollow-eyed and faceless, draped in a bridal gown sculpted from clay. The piece was titled, The Hollow Bride. I remember that title because it felt like a warning. Cross was infamous in the Institute. Formerly a celebrated sculptor from Boston's elite art scene, now a patient in the high-security wing for having murdered his wife. The story was legend. He'd caught her with another man. He claimed she ceased to exist in his eyes the moment he saw her betrayal, so he carved her likeness one final time, then caved her skull in with a chisel. His trial had turned into an art exhibit, a grotesque blend of genius and violence that the press devoured. In person, he was magnetic. Calm, composed, eerily lucid. There was something about his voice. It made everything sound like poetry, even his confessions. Claire met him during a staff gathering, just a brief encounter, a glance at his work, a comment on texture, and something between them clicked in a way I didn't notice until much later. She began spending more time at the hospital, claiming she wanted to help with the patient art program, volunteering for the creative sessions. At first I was proud. She was finally smiling again, laughing even. But then the smiles became quieter, more secretive. I started noticing things, smudges of gray clay beneath her fingernails, the faint scent of wet earth on her skin, a charcoal sketch folded and hidden in the back of her journal, a man's profile, unmistakably crosses. He had this scar on his jawline, shaped like a crescent moon. She'd captured it perfectly. Once I caught her humming in the kitchen while shaping a lump of dough. It wasn't the song that haunted me. It was the way she touched the dough like it wasn't food but flesh. I asked her about it. She smiled and said, "He reminds me what it means to feel something." Then she laughed and added, "Don't worry, he's crazy, remember?" But I did worry. One evening, I returned home late from the night shift. Charlie was asleep. The lights were off except for the lamp in Claire's study. I walked toward it, expecting to find her sketching. Instead, I heard voices, hers and his. The door was slightly open. "I can't breathe without you," she whispered. "When I'm with him, it's like living inside a painting. Beautiful, but dead." His voice followed, smooth and low. "Then come with me. Let the world call us mad." There was silence. Then a soft rustle. A kiss, maybe. I didn't look. I stood in the hallway for 10 more minutes, frozen in place. My wife, my Claire, was planning her escape with a man who once carved his betrayal into a woman's face, then destroyed her for it. But here's the worst part. In that moment, in that hallway, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing. It was like someone had scooped out my chest and left the shell to watch the show. That night I lay beside her, pretending to sleep, while she stared at the ceiling with eyes that weren't mine anymore. And in my mind, one word echoed over and over: run. It happened during the storm. That night, Ridgeview was swallowed by darkness. The wind howled through the trees like something wild had been set loose in the woods. Power lines snapped one after another, plunging the entire facility into chaos. Alarms screeched. Staff ran through corridors with flashlights. Somewhere someone was screaming, not out of fear, but joy. By the time the backup generators kicked in, Nathaniel Cross was gone. His cell door stood wide open. The camera feeds were a mess, scrambled, flickering static. One of the windows in the sculpture studio was shattered. Clay scattered on the floor like broken bones. Later, they'd claim he used a chisel to pry open the lock. But I knew better. He didn't need tools. He had a map. My wife's heart. Claire was missing too. I tore through the house, calling her name until my voice cracked. Her closet had been emptied in a rush. No note, no goodbye. Just the lingering scent of her perfume on the sheets and a photograph missing from the nightstand, one of her and Charlie taken at the zoo last summer. The next morning, I found an envelope slid under our front door. No return address. Inside, a note scribbled in graphite, the handwriting unmistakable. "Don't come looking." She chose me. Below it, a small sketch. Two faceless figures standing in a storm, their hands reaching for each other across a barbed wire fence. The caption beneath, "Salvation hurts." I showed the letter to the police. They asked all the usual questions. I gave them all the usual answers. But deep down, I already knew where they were. The Red Lantern Inn. It was one of those motels you'd never stop at unless your life had come undone. Red neon sign buzzing half dead, flickering like a pulse. A cracked vending machine outside the lobby. Room 6 smelled like mildew and cigarettes. I stood outside their door for a full minute before knocking. My hand didn't shake. "I wish it had." She opened it. Claire. Barefoot, hair damp, wearing a black camisole I hadn't seen before. Her eyes widened, not in guilt, but in panic. Not because she was caught, because she knew what came next. "Michael," she whispered, as if saying my name hurt. I looked past her. Nathaniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless, Sculptor's hands resting calmly on his thighs. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. "I need you to leave," she said quietly. "No," I said. "You need to come home." She looked down, then back up. "You don't understand. I feel things when I'm with him. Things I didn't know I could feel anymore. He sees me. He brings me back to life." I laughed bitterly. "He killed his wife, Claire, and I'm dying without him," she shot back. "Do you know what it's like to walk through your life like a ghost? You look at me, but you don't see me, not like he does." I stared at her, then at Cross, who hadn't moved an inch. His stillness was eerie, like a predator waiting for the right moment. "You're making a mistake," I said. Claire blinked. "Maybe, but it's my mistake." I left. The police caught them 2 weeks later, 3 counties south. A waitress recognized Cross's face from a flyer. When they burst into the motel room, Claire begged them not to hurt him. When they cuffed him, she screamed like a child losing their mother. He didn't resist, just looked at her and said, "The ocean always returns what it steals," whatever the hell that meant. She was returned to me. But the woman who came back wasn't Claire, not the one I married. Her eyes were always vacant, her voice soft, distracted. She no longer painted. She didn't ask about Ridgeview or her old studio. She didn't mention Charlie. She simply existed. I made the decision to move. A fresh start, again. This time in a windswept town on the coast of Maine. We bought a weathered blue house perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. Charlie started school. Claire spent her days walking the rocky shoreline, silent as driftwood. I tried to build a life again, for my son, for myself, maybe even for her. Then the letters started arriving. At first they were intercepted by the facility, but somehow Nathaniel found a way around the system. The envelopes had no return address, just a stamp and her name written in smudged graphite. Each one more unhinged than the last. One was simply a poem. She sleeps beside the tide, a woman made of salt and silence, and every wave whispers her name. Claire, Claire, Claire. She kept everyone. Hid them in a shoebox beneath the bed. I found it by accident while searching for socks. Dozens of them, folded like love notes from a high school crush. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the words, it was the sketch. Titled, "Sleeping Woman and the Sea," it was her. Lying on her side, hair fanned across the sand, the ocean rising behind her like a lover leaning in. She was sculpted from stone but looked alive, and her face was peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. Claire said nothing when I confronted her. Just looked at me like I'd stolen something sacred. Then came the night he showed up. It was raining, the kind of cold, drenching rain that makes your bones ache. Charlie had already gone to bed. Claire was curled on the couch pretending to read. I was in the kitchen drying dishes when the doorbell rang. I opened it and froze. Nathaniel Cross stood on the porch, soaked to the skin, lips cracked, cheeks hollow. He looked like a ghost who refused to die. "Evening," he said casually, as if this were normal. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the door and locked it, then called the police with trembling fingers. Claire ran to the entryway, saw his figure through the window, and screamed. "No! No, don't hurt him!" She tried to unlock the door. I stopped her. We struggled. She was crying, begging me to let her see him. The police arrived minutes later, guns drawn. Cross didn't fight. He raised his hands and smiled, rain dripping from his nose. They took him away. Claire collapsed to the floor, sobbing like her lungs were tearing open. Not for me, not for Charlie. But for him, I watched through the window as the cruiser disappeared into the trees, and I remember thinking, I don't know how much more of this I can take. After they took him away, again, something inside Claire simply broke. She didn't scream. She didn't beg anymore. She just stopped. Like a record that had reached the end of its groove and never bothered to reset. She barely spoke. Her voice, once the soft lullaby of our home, became a memory. At first, she mumbled a few words here and there, simple answers. Yes. No. I'm tired. Then silence. Long, unbearable stretches of it. Days passed when she wouldn't utter a single sound. She wandered the house like a faded photograph, familiar, but no longer real. Her footsteps were slow, deliberate, like she was counting them. She stopped eating regular meals. Sometimes I'd find half-eaten toast left in strange places, on the stairs, inside the bathroom sink, beside the window ledge. One morning, I caught her standing on the edge of the cliff behind our house, barefoot in the frost, staring out over the gray ocean. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and she didn't flinch. She looked like she belonged to the sea more than to us. I called her name. She didn't turn. That night, our son asked me something that tore a small hole in my chest. "Is Mom sick?" I knelt beside him, brushing his blonde hair away from his eyes. "She's just tired, buddy," he frowned. "She's not tired. She's gone." I didn't have an answer, because deep down, I knew he was right. A few days later, I found one of his drawings on the fridge. He'd taped it up quietly, without showing me. It was done in crayon, his usual medium, but this one was darker than usual. There were two people, stick figures, one labeled Mom, the other Dad. Between them was a thick black crack. In the ground, jagged like lightning. Beneath it, he had written, "I can't jump that far." I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried, not just for him, but for the version of our lives that had vanished, for the family we once were, for the love that had rotted so slowly I barely noticed until it stank. Claire still didn't notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. Later that same week, I stumbled upon her journal. She had hidden it in the laundry basket under a pile of towels, like a child hiding something shameful. The pages were filled with chaotic loops of handwriting, some full sentences, some torn apart mid-thought. But one entry stood out, scrawled across 2 pages in shaky black ink. "He's the fire. You're the ashes. You smothered me with your safety. He burns me alive. I'd rather burn." I closed the book, placed it back exactly where I found it, and didn't mention it. What was there to say? I started locking our bedroom door at night. Not because I feared her, but because I feared what I might say if she looked at me like I was the villain again. Charlie became quieter, too. He used to talk to me about superheroes, about school, about the odd names he gave to the rocks he collected along the shore. But now, he mostly asked questions I couldn't answer. Why doesn't Mom hug me anymore? Do you think she likes the ocean more than us? Can people disappear without leaving? And then, one night he was gone. It was a Thursday, late autumn, the kind of night where the leaves sound like whispers outside your window. I'd gone to check on him around midnight. His bed was empty, window unlocked, shoes missing. I ran through the trees with a flashlight, calling his name like a prayer. Neighbors joined the search, hours blurred, voices shouted. The wind carried our desperation across the hills. They found him at dawn, at the base of the cliff. His body twisted among the jagged rocks like a broken toy. His eyes closed, his hands scraped and red. They said he must have slipped, that it was probably an accident. But I knew. He'd been walking along that edge for weeks, watching the sea swallow pieces of his mother. Maybe he thought if he got close enough, it would give her back. The funeral was small. Just a few neighbors, a quiet pastor, a coffin far too small for any kind of God to allow. I held Claire's hand the entire time. She didn't cry, didn't tremble. She just stared at the clouds above like they were going to answer for what had happened. When the pastor spoke Charlie's name, I felt her fingers tense. When he said, "Beloved son," she closed her eyes, but still, no tears. After everyone left, I stood by his grave alone. I didn't speak to God. I spoke to Charlie. "I'm sorry I wasn't enough," I whispered. "I tried. I really did." The wind rustled the leaves, the only answer I got. When I returned to the house, Claire was sitting in the living room, motionless. She had unpacked one of the shoe boxes again. Cross's letters were spread across the floor like the petals of a dead flower. She was tracing her finger over one of his sketches. Sleeping woman and the sea. I looked at her. Not the woman I'd married. Not the mother of my child. Not even a person I could reason with. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask her why. I just walked to the phone and dialed Ridgeview. Dr. Philip Green answered. Calm, collected. The kind of voice that had spent years consoling families, talking people off ledges. I need to bring her back, I said. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Bring her in the morning. We'll have a room ready. I packed her things, in silence that night. She didn't resist, didn't question. She walked to the car like a sleepwalker. Her hands in her lap, her gaze on the dashboard. Not once did she look back at the house, not even when we drove past Charlie's treehouse, the one we built together last summer, where he'd once shouted, "I'm king of the sky!" She didn't even blink. When we arrived at Ridgeview, Dr. Green greeted us with that signature empathetic smile. He spoke softly, offered tea, asked about her sleep. She didn't answer. He looked at me and said, "We'll take care of her now." I nodded. Then I walked away. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But the air was cold and empty, and there was no one left to breathe it with me. Ridgeview changed her again. Not all at once, not in a way anyone would notice. Right away. But slowly, like winter swallowing fall. One day I realized she'd stopped wearing gray. She had begun brushing her hair again. Not for me, not for Charlie, he was long gone, but for herself, or maybe for him. Dr. Philip Green took an interest in Claire almost immediately. He was the Institute's chief psychiatrist, a man whose voice was engineered for reassurance and power. Everything about him was calculated. His glasses, his wristwatch, even his quiet, practiced smile. You didn't trust him because he made you feel safe. You trusted him because he made you forget why you ever felt afraid in the first place. He approached Claire through art. He reopened Ridgeview's long-abandoned painting studio, filled it with soft light, blank canvases, and freshly sharpened pencils. He gave her space, then gave her tools, and when she finally touched the brush again, he gave her silence. At first, she painted fragments, waves breaking on black rocks, a scarlet scarf floating in a river, a man's hands wrapped in thorns. Then came the portraits. None of them were of me. She painted Nathaniel's eyes from memory, painted his voice in streaks of blue and rust, painted the shape of their shared madness over and over until even, I had to admit, it was beautiful. Dr. Green admired her deeply, too deeply. I started to notice the way he lingered when she entered a room, how he always managed to coincidentally pass by the art studio when she was working, how he leaned in too close when speaking, how Claire didn't seem to mind. A month passed, then two, and then one evening he called me into his office. Books lined the shelves in perfect rows. A kettle steamed beside a pair of untouched teacups. He invited me to sit, but I remained standing. I have a proposition, he said, as if discussing a chess move. She's making progress, he continued, but she's still emotionally shackled, still restrained by the institution itself, her meds, the routine, the expectations. I crossed my arms. So let her off the meds, he smiled. That's not enough. She needs something real. I didn't like the way he said it. I didn't like the pause before real. What are you saying? I'm saying I can remove her from our standard care protocol. No more sedation, no locked doors, no nightly check-ins, but only if she agrees to a monitored cohabitation arrangement. Monitored, I repeated, jaw tightening. With you, he nodded, shameless. She'll be safe. She'll be adored. I stood there, trying to decide whether to punch him or thank him for being honest. In the end, I did neither. Instead, I left. Claire moved into his on-site residence 3 days later, and just like that, she was smiling again. Not the wide, innocent smile I remembered from years ago, but a small, private one. The kind of smile that made you feel like she was holding a secret, like someone had returned her the missing piece of a broken mirror, and now she could see herself clearly again. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the strength. Dr. Green threw a masquerade ball at Ridgeview that winter. The first in decades, invitations were extended to staff, select patients, and a few former alumni. There were rumors of a guest pianist flown in from Vienna, a ballroom quartet, a wine tasting for the board. But Claire only cared about one thing. Would Nathaniel be there? She never asked me directly, but I heard her whispering to a nurse, saw her drawing the same face in her sketch pad again and again. The curve of his mouth, the scar on his jaw. She believed he would come. She believed it like someone waiting for a lover to return from war. She wore red that night. Not just any red, a blood-red satin gown with an open back and a train that brushed the floor like a whisper. Her hair was pinned up, but loose strands framed her face. She wore no jewelry, no makeup beyond a hint of color on her lips. She looked like the ghost of something too beautiful to live. I watched her from the far end of the ballroom. She didn't see me. She sat alone at a table near the center, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the door. Every time it opened, she tensed. Every time it was someone else, her shoulders dropped. She waited the whole night. He never came. What she didn't know, what I later learned, was that Nathaniel had been transferred weeks ago to a high-security underground wing in Vermont. Ridgeview had quietly moved their most dangerous patient after his second escape. He would never walk those halls again. But Claire didn't know, and I didn't tell her. The next morning, a nurse found her lying in bed, still in her red dress, makeup smeared, around her eyes, a bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand. Empty. Her breathing was slow, shallow, her lips slightly parted like she was whispering to someone in her dream. They called me. I drove back to Ridgeview without thinking, wind whipping through half-open, windows, heart pounding against a cage of guilt. She was unconscious when I arrived, hooked up to machines, pale, hands folded neatly like she'd posed herself. She looked like a wax statue. In her lap sat a folded note, addressed to me. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, in careful script, she had written just one sentence. Tell him I waited in red. That was all. No apology, no explanation, no goodbye. Just a message to a man who would never read it. I sat by her bed for hours, holding her cold hand, watching the heart monitor flatten into a quiet, final line. Later that evening, Dr. Green approached me, eyes hollow. "I'm sorry," he said. I didn't answer. I just looked at the empty chair across from me, the one I had reserved in my heart for her return. She never took it. She chose the ocean instead. The fire, the ache, the madness. And me? I chose to remember the woman who once laughed in the rain, who painted stars on our son's ceiling, who kissed me with paint on her fingers and said, "Promise me you'll never stop loving me, even when I'm unlovable." I never stopped. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it's the weight that drags you down.